It's a brand new episode of the Good Old Podcast. On this week's episode, we not only look back at Virginia's big win over Coastal Carolina, but we also look ahead to Virginia's non conference game. I know it's strange, but non conference game against NC State. What are the challenges for Virginia? What are the key matchups for UVA? We're going to have Cory Smith from Pack Pride join the show to break down what NC State looks like and what are the keys to the game. And of course, we give you predictions. Both Corey and I will predict the game and what we expect to happen. So, all that is coming up on this week's Good Old Podcast. And welcome to a new episode of the Good Old Podcast. I'm Jacquie Franciulli for Wahoo's 24/7. And Virginia is started the season 1-0 after beating Coastal Carolina 48-7, a very convincing win. Now it's a tougher test when they travel to NC State, a hostile environment that UVA has not had the best of luck at, and they face them in the non-conference game on Saturday. But before we get recapping and previewing, why don't you go ahead and like this video, click on the bell so that you're notified when there's a new video, and head over to wherever you listen to your podcast and give us a 5-star review. So, Virginia 1-0. They did what they needed to do. And what was crucial in this, not only did they win, but it was in the manner that they won. Virginia played complementary football. The defense did its job. The offense, although slow at the beginning, did its job, and also and also special teams did its job, which is an area where we have seen Virginia struggle during Tony Elliott's era. I mean, coverages were improved last year, but they weren't able to flip the field as far as kickoff returns and punt returns, which was changed. Cam Ross scored UVA's first touchdown from a kickoff return since 2019. Then Caleb Hardy blocked a punt where Troy McDonald was able to recover. So a lot of good moving pieces on several parts of the field. And that was good to see for Virginia. And it was needed to see for Virginia to show where they were able to improve. Those little details will hopefully matter as they go on into the season. Obviously, it was coming out party for Cam Ross. I mean, over 200 all purpose yards for him. Also, it was good to see Trell Harris healthy, with him having that remarkable one-handed catch, but also just showing how much he was missed last year. I mean, if you listen to the podcast here, wherever I was talking about Trell Harris last year during preseason, I always mentioned that Trell Harris was going to be my breakout wide receiver, thinking that he was going to be the guy who stole a lot of the headlines for Virginia on the offense. Unfortunately, he was hurt last year, ironically, against Coastal Carolina. And then things took a turn on Virginia's offense. They missed him, for stretching the field, down the field threat. They had no one that could compare to Trell Harris, which kind of left a lot on Malachi Field's plate. Now they have him back, and he plays a very good complementary football when it comes with him and Cam Ross. That's a good combination. Plus, you add Jamal Edrin with his big frame. That gives Chandler Morris excellent weapons to use and spread the ball a little bit. The main talking point for me too was the trenches. I mean, obviously the O-line, their pass protection got better as the game went on. Unfortunately, Wallace Tsunamo got hurt in the first quarter, but at the same time, you saw that there was options. Tyshawn Wyatt came in, Jack Whitmer came in, Ethan Syke came in. I mean, at one point, it looked like I was watching a hockey game because Tony Elliott and company just completely switched up the line. I think Brady Wilson was the only one to stay in the game. This was in the first half, so it wasn't like they were playing guys down the depth chart. These are guys that they were competing for playing time, and they were doing it early on in the game. So both Des Kitchings and Tony Elliott said this week that they would like to have about 10 to 12 guys that are able to be fielded on the team in the offensive line to keep them fresh. Now, it's usually unconventional to have O-line subbing in like that, but that's something that they are exploring and having those guys a little more fresh by having the additional depth that they haven't had before. On the other side, I mean, it was a full-time job almost keeping up to tabs with the changes both on the O-line and on the D-line, because the D-line, they kept switching up depending on situations. I really liked when there was those speedier packages where they had Kazim Moore, Dan Ricker, instead of at the end, he was at defensive tackle alongside Jacob Holmes. And then you had Fisher Kamek. I really like that combination there where there was a lot of it was more speed that they brought up front, and hopefully you're going to see more of a pass rush created against NC State because of that. Now Virginia only had one sack. It was a combination of Maddox Marcellus, who also had some good moments in the game, and Fisher Kamek. But again, against Coastal Carolina, how much do you think they're going to reveal? Like that was a very vanilla defense. So this is the week where I feel like we're going to see more of what this Virginia defense is able to do, including the secondary. That was the biggest question for me going into the Coastal Carolina game because Coastal Carolina has an air raid offense. But it seemed like the secondary did its job. I mean, Donovan Platt in the first quarter had 3 pass breakups. He was one of those guys that I thought was going to contribute really early and was gonna be one of the starters at corner when I did my preseason depth chart. And I think you see why, because he had 3 pass breakups, and then Coastal Carolina didn't throw to him for the rest of the game. So you have him and Emmanuel Carnley as your starting corners or Jordan Robinson coming in. Then at safety, you have plenty of options as well. Obviously, Devin Neal is the one that we kinda knew was going to start. On the other positions between, Ethan Minter, Christian Charles, DeMarcus Crosby was kind of where we're going, especially if Antonio Clary's still out. You thought one of those guys would play alongside Jason Brevard, who's in that spur position. And Ethan Minter, my goodness, I mean, I can't when you think of a guy who has really worked hard to get on the field and really early, I mean, look, Ethan Minter wasn't playing safety 2 years ago. He was playing quarterback. He was playing on the other side of the ball. He never really tackled defense. I know when he was at Thomas Dale, they were thinking of putting him on defense, possibly his senior year prior to his knee injury. So he didn't really experience the safety position up until he came to Virginia. So he had an interception last year on one of his first playing time, and then this year he already had another pick on Saturday. And if you talk to anyone around the program, it seems like he is a ball hawk. He's had several picks in practices, or at least his hand has been on the ball. So you have guys that are around the ball, and that's a little bit of an after effect of just having a good defensive line and a good front. Because I think a lot of times last year, the secondary got blamed for a lot of things. But if you're not getting any pass rush or any push up front, it's going to affect what the guys in the secondary and what the guys and the linebackers can do. I mean, if you're getting up front and you're not winning your double teams, and then suddenly the linebackers have to come help, then you're having issues. So it's kind of like a cascading effect. So that's something that was shown a little bit against Coastal Carolina. Danley was probably my defender of the week, apart from Donovan Platt, who got my game ball for his pass breakups. I think Landon Danley did a very good job in his first career start at linebacker. Last year, he played mostly on special teams. You've been hearing a lot about him in the offseason, but he did a good job playing linebacker for the first time as a starter in his career. He was a guy who was coming in as a safety in high schools. He led the team in tackles with 7. He showed he was very good in coverage and was able to close in. I think he's gonna be a very good asset for UVA pairing with James Jackson while Cam Robinson is still getting healthy, especially when you're dealing with, more pass-friendly teams. I think Trey McDonald might be one that they look towards, anyone that's more of a rushing team, but as far as, what Coastal Carolina was able to do, that's who they went with, and that made sense. And even now when you look at NC State and you look at their tight end, Justin Jolly, I think he's gonna be somewhere where you think, "Yes, I can see Landon Danley matching up with him," but that's kind of the biggest just a quick recap of what stood out to me in that Coastal Carolina win. Now moving on, what were the big takeaways from Tony Elliott's press conference? I mean, Chandler Morris is available for the game. Maybe I should have started up with that, but by the time you listen to the podcast, I imagine you know that Chandler Morris is good to go for the game. When Tony Elliott was asked about the expectation if he thought Chandler Morris would play, he's like, I expect he plays his tail off on Saturday. So no question there about Chandler Morris. The big question is, like I mentioned, Wallace Unamba, if he'll be ready to play against NC State. Now, if he's not ready to go at right tackle, he hurt his right knee during the game against the Chanticleers. You're looking at Jack Whitmer, who's had a lot of experience. Obviously, he played a lot last year when they were dealing with injuries. He can play left or right tackle. So he's a name that Virginia will look to. I mean, he helped one of the touchdowns. He was one of the main blockers there. So obviously, he's got plenty of experience. Then you got Ben York, who's an up and coming offensive lineman. He's a young guy, but he's shown tremendous development, and he's been pretty high with the staff since spring, where we kind of seen more of him with all the O-line injuries. So his stock has kind of risen. Then you have Ethan Sipe, who's played right guard and right tackle, so you can possibly see him kind of fitting in there. And then you have John Adair, which is a name that Tony Elliott mentioned in his Tuesday press conference as a freshman that could possibly get some playing time if needed. Probably if you're listening to all those names, you're curious about Tyshawn Wyatt. He is obviously a name to monitor as well at that right tackle position. He came in, he was the first off the bench when Wallace Dunamba came off, they turned to Wyatt. Now, with him, you have to think that this is a player that hasn't played football in about 18 months after he came back from a knee injury. So he's still working to gain fitness, and he's still working to get the confidence is his knee to play. So that's why I'm saying there's more options in that right tackle position. So I imagine Tyshawn Wyatt will get the nod first. But it could possibly be something where there's going to be a by committee approach to right tackle. So that's certainly one thing that I'm looking at when I'm looking at this NC State game is who's going to line up at right tackle alongside Drake Metcalf at right guard. You did a good job against Coastal Carolina. He actually graded pretty decently at in the PFF grades. If you looked at Wahoo's 24/7 on Sunday, when I post those grades after the game, he graded out pretty well. In addition to Brady Wilson and Jack Whitmer, those are some of the guys that graded pretty well according to PFF. Now, the other injury notes, we're still waiting on what Sadarian Harrison's status will be for the game. And also, good news is that linebacker Cam Robinson, who had surgery earlier on in last towards the end of August, probably around the middle of training camp. He is expected to be back at practice next week, and Elliott is hopeful that he will be back on the field for the AC opener against Stanford. So a lot of good things as far as the injury front, as far as guys. One, Chandler Morris is good to go, and two, Cam Robinson should be back in practice next week. So good development there. Virginia released a depth chart. You can see it on the screen on on YouTube. But if you're not on YouTube and just hearing it, we do have the depth chart on Wahoo's 24/7. We post that every Tuesday, so that is available on Wahoo's 24/7. So there's no real changes, honestly, on the depth chart. Nothing that is um, not expected. So there is Noah Vaughn there. He's or it's Jamari Taylor is your number one. Then it's Xavier Brown or Harrison Whaley or Noah Vaughn. And that's something that we kind of expect. I mean, Elliott did mention that Noah Vaughn should have been in depth chart last week. So this is something that's just kind of expected for him to be there. So that was the one big change on the offensive side. And the defensive side, I mean, again, this is something that Elliott alluded to in the press conference that Donovan Platt or Jordan Robinson starting opposite Emmanuel Carnley. And although Jordan Robinson was number one last week on the depth chart, Donovan Platt is the actual starter there. And then Landon Danley is now officially the starter at linebacker over Trey McDonald. But everything else is practically the same. Um, Actually, Ethan Minter or Christian Charles at free safety. But everything again is the same. A lot of oars on that defensive line, and that's probably going to be the rest of the season because they're going to rotate a lot. So again, nothing really different on the depth chart. Um, and like I mentioned in our Wahoo's 24/7 takeaways, the depth chart is just the guideline. It's not written in stone. So take it with a grain of salt when you look at some of these things on the depth chart. For example, Tyshawn Wyatt came off the bench first at right tackle. So yeah, just take everything with a little bit of grain of salt when you look at the depth chart. And now we're going to turn our attention to the NC State game where Virginia travels to Raleigh. Now, we're going to go into more details about this game in the second half of the show because we're going to invite Cory Smith from PackPride.com to join the show. He's going to break down what the Pack looks like. We saw a little bit of it on that midweek game last week where they had a tough opponent, a tough game against ECU. So we're going to find out his initial impressions of NC State. What kind of went wrong there when they allowed ECU to come back? What were some of the challenges he saw? What are the things that he learned about this team? Because obviously they're going to have a new coordinator on that defensive side of the ball. So it's just getting to know a little bit about what the expectations are there, but also talk a little bit about the key matchups. Because for me, I'm really looking forward to seeing this UVA secondary against a very talented wide receiver room because this is a opportunity for this team to get challenged that way. So you really get to know what exactly Virginia has in the secondary. How much of an improvement did they really do with this team that has Wesley Grimes, who is a very, very speedy guy, and obviously Justin Jolly, a very talented tight end. You're going to keep an eye on not only the secondary, but Landon Danley, who they thought is going to be a stronger guy in coverage. So how is that matchups going to do this week? So those are kind of the main battles, and obviously the battles in the trenches. I mean, you want your defensive line to get after their quarterback Bailey because you want him to be throwing and making mistakes. That is something that they want to do, and that's something that ECU did where they first forced those turnovers. So those are things that I'm looking forward to seeing, and obviously seeing what this O line does against a power forward defensive line, and seeing if Chandler Morris does get time in the pocket. So a lot of keys for Virginia there as they hope to cement the run to open up Chandler Morris to getting the ball to Cam Ross and Trell Harris. So we're going to take a quick break and then we're going to invite Cory on the other side so we can talk about this upcoming game. And welcome back to the Good Old Podcast. I'm Jacquie Franciulli for Wahoo's 24/7. In the first half of the show, we broke down what Virginia did good and what Virginia needs to work on after their win against Coastal Carolina. And also, we broke down those big injury news for Virginia that Chandler Morris is, in fact, going to play at the game against NC State. And to prepare for NC State, we have a special guest, Cory Smith from Pat Pride. Cory, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, I appreciate you having me on.
It's going to be an interesting game. I keep having to correct myself saying it's non-conference game
It's a
between Virginia and NC State. It's like my mind is trying to wrap around that. But it's going to be a good test for both programs coming into this season. Both teams look a little bit different from last year. Obviously, Virginia's got 53 new players on their roster. For Virginia fans who haven't seen NC State, what is the biggest difference of this pack roster right now heading into the season?
Yeah, I mean, I would say first of all, the confidence of CJ Bailey. Last year he was on the team, but spent the entire offseason not as the guy. The expectation was a former, ironically enough, former Coastal Carolina quarterback in Grayson McCall was expected to be the guy. A couple concussions changed that outcome. CJ Bailey goes through an entire offseason of being the guy, clearly more confident in the pocket. There's still some things to work on, and we talked about that actually on our podcast. Decision making and things like that in clutch situations that come with time. He's a guy that just made his ninth start overall, so there's a lot that comes with that. Not exactly as veteran as a guy like Chandler Morris, despite the fact that he's just made his first start at Virginia, has been around the block a couple times. But the new look roster for NC State is mostly on the defensive side of the football. Offense, they had a lot of pieces coming back: Justin Jolie, Noah Rogers, Wesley Grimes, that have all made an impact over the years. But on the defensive side of the football, Sebastian Harsh is one to know, a guy that came over from Wyoming. Another guy from the Mountain West Conference that came over is Kean Sloan. I want to make sure I get the pronunciation right there. But those two, as edge rushers, linebackers, defensive end, whatever you want to profile them as, this past week were all over the football. So the expectation is this front six is expected to take a big jump, whether it's a 4-2 or 3-3, however they line it up at the time. The defensive backfield has a little bit of work to do. So I think that's the biggest question mark heading into this game.
Yeah, and then that's actually where I want to start because when we saw Virginia against Coastal Carolina, that's what jumped out to me was their depth at wide receiver, especially when you see Cam Ross and what he was able to do both on offense and on special teams. And then obviously you see the potential of Trey Harris stretching the field for Virginia and Jamal Edrin, just his physical size. So when I see a key matchup for Virginia, it's their wide receivers against NC State secondary.
Yeah, I would say the exact same thing. I think that's one that we're going to highlight too. Is that's one that NC State. I don't know if you necessarily have to win, but you just have to hold front. Like you have to at least limit the damage there and allow your front six to get after the quarterback, kind of keep Chandler Morris off balance in this game. But one interesting matchup here: Brian Nelson, a guy that actually came over from North Texas as well, so he has experience in practice against Chandler Morris. So I'm interested to see if he's able to help a little bit and trying to figure out some of the tendencies. But also, Chandler Morris is probably going to look to him a couple times in the when he's matched up against some of his guys and go, all right, how do I pick him apart in this game too? So I'm interested to see that chess match throughout the game. The biggest question mark for NC State is not necessarily the cornerback position, but more so the safety position, which is really concerning when you have a team like UVA that wants to take the top off of defenses. They're undersized at that position, and they have two redshirt freshmen in Ronnie Royal III and Brody Barnhart, two guys they really liked in their recruiting classes 2 years ago, but two guys that are very inexperienced. They just played their first game and they got played a little bit in the defensive backfield a couple times by ECU. But they have an experienced guy in JJ Johnson that came over from Georgia State, manning the other safety position for them. But again, he's an undersized guy, 5'10", 5'11" on a good day with the right size cleats. Type of guy at that position. So you got some bigger receivers. You got some guys that you want to take the top off the defense. It's going to make life difficult for NC State in that defensive backfield.
And everyone who's watched the game against NC State saw a pattern that a lot of NC State fans can talk to you about how they were ahead in the game, and then the closing part of the game, other teams start coming back, conservative play calling. Was that only what you saw against ECU? Was there something else that happened? Was there something in the offense that you had questions about? Was it CJ Bailey just had an up and down performance?
A little bit of, it's a little bit of both. It's some of it's on coaching, some of it's, keeping the foot on the pedal. I look back to that fourth quarter in particular. There's a couple drives where it's a tale of two different things here. CJ Bailey, I thought, made a big play. You get the ball down the field, 50-yard reception by Teddy Hoffman to set up, NC State getting close to the red zone, and then a decision on third down. CJ Bailey rolls out. I think it was the 29-yard line at the time. He rolls out and holds onto the football a little bit too long. Had Teddy Hoffman actually wide open in the back of the end zone, the left side of the end zone, and he's having to roll out of the pocket because of the fact that he's nearly about to get sacked. And then just holds onto the football instead of throwing it away, instead of setting up a makeable field goal. Yes, you love to get the touchdown there, but it sets up a makeable field goal to then make it, 27 to, I believe it would have been 27 to 14 or 27 to 10 game at the time. You have a chance to pull away by more than two scores and really, put the game away at that point. And instead, he takes a sack. They miss the field goal. And then on the next drive, you get another big play. And then it's the conservative play calling. It's three straight runs when you're close to the red zone instead of, trying to to throw to set up the run. And I think that's kind of what NC State should be doing. It's easy to say that after one game and obviously Kurt Roper taking over. But this team is successful throwing the football, whether it's, deep down the field or, across the middle to a guy like Justin Jolie or trying to dump it off to Hollywood Smothers. They've got the playmakers to be able to do those types of things. They got conservative late. You run the football one time with Hollywood Smothers, and then you try two QB runs and you don't get anywhere. You kick a field goal, you miss it again. And I think it's putting your players in better situations to be able to thrive in that situation too.
And we're going to talk about special teams in a little bit because this is the first season where I can say that special teams might be UVA's strength after one game and just the improvements we saw there. But on the offensive side, we talked about Virginia, how the wide receiver room was very competitive. NC State has a very good wide receiver too. Wesley Grimes, I love his speed. I think he's and he's not even the top receiver option for NC State. That's going to be a big challenge for Virginia secondary, which we only got to see one opportunity of them playing together, which was against Coastal Carolina. A lot of those guys missed a lot of training camp, so that was the first opportunity for a lot of them to play together. So, what type of challenge does the wide receiver unit possess? Like, what type of strength do each of those receivers have?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people talk about the wide receivers and forget that Justin Jolie is just as much of a wide receiver in the system as anybody. Didn't get off to a great start. I think it was 5 catches for like 20 some odd yards. So, but a lot of times he was facing double teams, and I think it's going to change a little bit once you play teams that feel more confident in their defense. Feel like, hey, we could put this guy in single coverage on Wesley Grimes, or we could put somebody in single coverage on Justin Jolie, and those guys getting more opportunities. So I think when you look at this, this wide receiver unit, yes, exactly as you said, the two guys that shined in this first game were actually Wesley Grimes and Teddy Hoffman. I think most of it expected to be, the number 2 and probably number 5 receivers going into the season. Like Teddy Hoffman was not expected to be, anywhere close to producing over 90 yards in his first game at NC State. So that's a welcome sight for this offense, and something that, when you put that on tape, all of a sudden Virginia has to respect that. You go, all right, well, Teddy Hoffman is at least a possession receiver. I don't expect him to make a big play like a 50-yard reception every single game, but you have to at least respect that, along with a Noah Rogers, a former top 40 overall receiver. Hasn't seen his potential yet, but he's a home run hitter for NC State. That's somebody that can take the top off of a defense. And then you've also got good possession receivers like a Teddy Hoffman. Wesley Grimes has elite speed. Then you have some other guys that haven't seen as much progress yet, or as much, production yet to this point, in Terrell Anderson and Keenan Jackson, but those are two other guys they really like in this system. So, but if Justin Jolie gets going, that is their to me, that's their lead receiver, and then Noah Rogers is somebody that they're just waiting on to have that breakout moment.
Yeah, Justin Jolie, the tight end. I think, Landon Danley, who's the linebacker who's kinda come in and, grown a lot for Virginia. He used to be a safety, they moved him to linebacker. He has a lot of speed. I think that's gonna be the matchup to watch there for Virginia as well. He did really good in coverage against Coastal Carolina, so I expect him to, kinda play ahead of Trey McDonald alongside James Jackson on Saturday. But you mentioned special teams because for the first time, like I said, Virginia has done a lot of improvement on that side, on that phase of the ball. On again against Coast Carolina, they had the first kickoff return touchdown by Cam Ross since 2019. So it's been a big improvement on that side of the ball. Obviously, Will Bettridge, Daniel Sparks are both returning. Meanwhile, NC State, a lot of questions in that kicking unit. Who do you expect to kind of line up as the place kicker? Is there a competition there, or what's been kind of the main storyline around the special teams unit?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's easy to say that, but like, going into this game, last game, Nick Konachensky was a guy that they expected to be the guy. They talked about it in the offseason, and he outright won the competition. I think Dave Doran said he was kicking at like a 91% clip, and that's at all field goal ranges during the offseason and in fall camp. Kanoa Vineset was the guy last year. He was the kicker all season long. He went, 4 of 8 from field goals past 40 yards. So it's easy to say, oh, well, they need to make the change, and this is the guy they clearly need to go with. He's the more experienced guy. Well, when you start off 0 for 2 for 40-yard field goals for Nate Konachensky, that's a tough look. But hey, if you go 2 for 2 next game, suddenly you're kicking at the same ratio that Kanoa Vineset was going last year as a whole. So those things kind of have to weigh in here, and obviously it's a frustrating thing to see that in the first game. But he did hit his first field goal, 29-yarder. If you're set up in better range, again, I talked about it earlier. If CJ Bailey doesn't take a sack and he kicks a 35-yarder from the right side instead of kicking a 40-yarder from the left side, how much does that change things? So you have to take all those into consideration here. Dave did say we're going to evaluate the kicker position moving forward, and I don't think that was his thought process going into the season. But if Konachensky struggles again, you could see Kanoa Vineset in this game. And then as far as the kick return and that unit punt return, the expectation going into the season was that Jonathan Paylor, a former top 100, top 125 type player with elite speed, was going to be the guy going into the season. He suffered an injury. We haven't heard definitively, but the expectation is he won't be available the rest of the season due to a preseason injury. The guy that comes in there, Wesley Grimes, 4.24 speed, in the 40-yard dash this offseason. So he has some, breakaway speed. We haven't seen it to this point. Didn't actually return one for a punt in the first game. And then Teddy Hoffman that I mentioned earlier, another guy that's expected to make an impact. And then the last guy here, Duke Scott, we haven't talked about him, but in that backfield, kind of a bruising tailback, but also somebody who has really good speed, great strength at that position. So he offers them something different on kick return too.
So are you telling me, Corey, a game that's considered a toss-up right now, according to Vegas, might be decided by special teams?
Yeah. I mean, look, the last game for NC State was almost decided by special teams. You missed two field goals that could have put you up by two scores. and then you have ECU driving on the very last drive, and you have to get a fourth down stop for them to not get a touchdown to tie things up. Yeah, that one came down to special teams too. So these tight games, especially when it comes to ACC play, I expect a lot of these games for NC State to come down to special teams, and that's why that unit needs to get better because the offense has a chance to be, I think, top five in the ACC. The defense has a chance to be better than we thought. But if that special teams unit is not progressing and not getting better, then NC State's going to be in a lot of tight games late.
We kind of broke down a little bit the keys of the game for both teams throughout this interview. But before we get your prediction, what's the environment expected to be like? That's a part where when I'm trying to make my prediction, when it's a toss up like this, home environment is going to be key. And do you expect a big crowd there?
Yeah, I mean, I expect a big crowd every Saturday, Thursday, Friday, whenever they line up. I mean, it's funny because, the joke has always been the fans will always be there regardless of the results. And NC State is that, that type of fan base. The tailgating is elite. It's not as big of an environment as some of the SEC programs and stuff like that. I've had some people kind of push back on me on that. I'm like, well, it's also a 56,000 person stadium. So you're not expected to have, 100,000 people in the tailgate lots and things along those lines. But, the environment has always been really good. And it's always been, a stadium that when people talk about, okay, well, Carter Finley Stadium, where does it rank in the ACC? They've always put it as kind of a sleeper stadium because of the fact that, yes, it doesn't have the team that Florida State sometimes consistently has. You don't have the team that Clemson consistently has, but the fan base is always there and they're right on top of you. And I think that is a game changer too. They put the student section right behind the benches for UVA in this game, and I think that's going to be something that it contributes to this too.
It's going to be definitely an interesting matchup. Again, the non-conference angle is definitely something that's different for these two teams. Now, we talked how it's a toss-up. We've talked a little bit about the keys of the game, especially for NC State here. What's your prediction for this matchup?
Yeah, I haven't gone through an exact number. Labor Day is kind of throwing me off a little bit here, but if I had to go with a prediction, I think right now I have it as a tight one for NC State. I talked about it. I think in the when I sent it to you, but I think this is going to be a game that comes down to again, probably the final possession. I know that NC State fans don't want to hear that, and UVA fans, I'm sure would like for this to be a blowout game and be one that's a little bit easier. But I think it ultimately ends up being a 31-27 win for NC State. I somewhat agree with the odds makers in Vegas going, all right, well, this is probably a 2.5 to 3 point margin for NC State, which is typically a pick 'em. Like if you're the home team and you get a 3 point margin, that means that Vegas thinks this is probably going to be a pick 'em if it was at our neutral site. So when I'm looking at this one, I think the difference is this offense gets a little more consistency. I think this offense is able to find a way to get some deep shots again. But I think that the key here is going to be Hollywood Smothers getting going. I thought he played well in the first game, and if not for an erroneous holding call against Noah Rogers deep down the field, which absolutely had zero impact on Hollywood Smothers' rushing attack, he would have finished with over 100 yards and finished with a touchdown on the ground. That would have looked a lot better than the 25 carries for 78 yards, however much it was. But I think he has a bigger impact in this game. And then again, I think it's going to come down to guys like Justin Jolie being able to be an impact player in this game. And I think the defense again just does enough. I don't think they're going to be the difference maker in this game, but I think against a UVA attack that just put up 48 points. Now, granted, I think again some of that was on the defense, some of that's on the special teams units, but this offense was able to put up a ton of points the last time out. I think if you're NC State, you're able to limit the damage and give your offense a chance to thrive, and the offense actually takes those opportunities. I think this is a win for NC State, 31-27 overall.
Yeah, it's definitely gonna be a close one. It'll be a long night for us, or long afternoon for us since the new game. Probably writing those stories last minute before it gets published at the end of kickoff. But Corey, thank you so much for joining us on the show, and thanks for answering the behind the lines questions as well. That'll be available on Wahoo's 24/7 on Thursday. So thanks, Corey.
I appreciate it.
Again for Corey for joining us on the show. It's always nice to have a different perspective on the game, especially seeing from the perspective of the opponent so we could get to know a little bit more of what is expected while Virginia hits the field on Saturday. And as you heard, Corey has picked NC State for his prediction. So I guess it's my time to make my own prediction. And as you probably read on the Behind Enemy Lines feature that I did with Corey on the NC State side, or maybe if you listen to the podcast that we did since I was a guest on his podcast, I did agree with him right now. Honestly, it's a toss up. And if it wasn't for the fact that it wasn't on the road, like if this game was in Scott Stadium, probably would have picked Virginia. I'm giving the edge to NC State because it's a road game. I still have questions about UVA. I think they did a great job of it. It's Coastal Carolina. They did what they needed to do. I felt that you can talk about them winning the games they needed to win, like last year against Richmond, for instance. It was just different because of the way they beat Coastal Carolina, and they did it by dominating from start to end. There was never a time where you thought, "Oh dear, what is gonna happen?" You felt like Virginia was in control. Even when they had a slow start on offense, you felt that Virginia was in control. And they play complementary football. They showed improvements in certain areas. I still have questions of how the secondary will look with a talented group at NC State. I really am interested to see how this O-line handles defensive line at NC State. I'm interested to see how this group faces in a performs in a hostile environment. So that's why I'm picking NC State. It's honestly more of Virginia, show me what you have done now against a Power 4 opponent, a conference opponent. Granted, it's non-conference game, but this is a conference opponent in the large scale things of comparing talent to talent. So this is an excellent opportunity for them to see where they stand in the ACC without getting dinged in the ACC standings. Obviously, this is a non-conference game. So again, I am picking NC State. Please, please don't be angry with me. It's the end of the show this week. As you can see, we're from last week and this week, the show is going to be on Thursdays from around for a season. Mostly it'll be recap from the previous week and then also looking forward. The only day that might change would be the week of Florida State, since that's a Friday night game. So most likely I'm going to try to do it on Wednesday. It all kind of depends on how the media availabilities usually stack up. Usually it's Tuesday and Wednesdays. I'm sure that'll be changing during the week with the Knowles. So just keep a loop out. But most of the time it is going to be on Thursdays. We'll do a little bit of recap followed up with a preview looking forward. So thanks again for listening to us. And if you want to read more about the NC State game, want to get to know a little bit more about Virginia, head over to wahoos247.com. We have plenty of pregame coverage. We'll be at Raleigh, so we have plenty of postgame coverage. We have recruiting reactions from last week's game where Virginia hosted a number of recruits. Virginia will host the next few weeks since they return home to Scott Stadium. Obviously, there's going to be the game against William and Mary. Plus, there'll be the ACC opener against Stanford. And of course, that Florida State game on Friday night. There'll be a lot of guys visiting the next few weeks. So follow along on Wahoo's 24/7. If you're not a member, unfortunately, the 75% sale ended, but the 60% sale, if you're a new subscriber, has started. So you can go on Wahoo's 24/7 and sign up as well. But for now, I hope you guys have a good rest to your week. And we'll be right back here next Thursday.